everybody. It is Kelli Nielsen here at The Grief Guru. I wanted to come in and re-record the talk that I did recently at the Addiction and Faith Conference. I know we had technical difficulties, and there were several people who were registered for the virtual portion of the event and weren't able to participate in the breakout session, or my breakout session specifically. So I wanted to come in here and re-record my talk so that anyone who had interest can still get the information. So with that, let me share my screen and we will go. So my talk is Grief Relief, Your Roadmap to Restoration. So the very first question I have for you is, you're not going anywhere, are you? See, that was the question that my 13-year-old daughter, Piper, asked of me on July 8th, 2018. Let me share with you why she was asking that question. See, just about a year and a half before that, my mom had taken her own life because of the mental health issues and addiction that ran in our family, and specifically in the relationship between my father and she. They had a very tumultuous relationship. There was codependency, addiction, a lot of awful things that happened in our family. So the morning of February 1st, 2017, I received a call notifying me that my mom had taken her own life. That one morning and that act shattered my family, and honestly, we haven't recovered. But not only that, grief came in and swept me out to sea. It was traumatic, as you can imagine, but I found myself ill-equipped to deal with the severity of grief, how disabling it was, how disorienting it was, the physical effects of grieving. I was having trouble just going through day-to-day functioning. I actually was in a leadership position at an organization. I had to step down because I did not have the capacity to lead a team, just emotionally, physically, everything. And I looked for help. I was involved in a church and sought help from my local church. I looked for books or courses or even counselors that could help me deal with this overwhelming grief and sorrow, all the questions, all the anger, everything that I had going on swirling in my head. And the other part of my story is that it was incredibly isolating. Most of my friends and family, it was like kind of too big for any of us to handle. Nobody knew what to do. My friends didn't know what to do or say. You know, the joke at the time was that my life was like an episode of Dateline. Like, none of us could believe that this had happened. So I felt incredibly alone in my grief, and I felt incredibly ill-equipped to be able to deal with it. Finally, I was referred to a suicide support group in my community, and I got in a room with other people who lost loved ones to suicide. And that was really comforting. It was really comforting to be in a room with people who got it, who understood my pain. The horrifying part of being in that room is that everyone in that room was operating the same way I was. They weren't really living life. They were just surviving life. They were just going through the motions. And I began to believe that that's what the rest of my life was going to look like. I just thought, okay, I'm going to be sad and miserable, and this is just what life looks like now. And I began to operate in that way for several months until, thankfully, I went to an event and I heard an amazing speaker share her story. So Immaculate had survived the Rwandan genocide, and she shared with us on stage how God had protected her in a bathroom with 8 other women for 90 days while she literally heard everyone she had ever known being killed around her. They were airing it over the radio, if you can imagine. So she shared with us in horrific detail, you know, that experience, surviving that. But more importantly for me, she shared how God led her through a healing process after she survived it, healing and mourning the loss of her entire family and basically everyone she had ever known, how God led her through a healing process, and she was able to release and let go and forgive those that had inflicted the pain. And I saw in front of me at that event a woman who was full of life. She was full of joy. She was full of expectation for good. And in that moment, hopelessness broke off of me. It was like a light bulb went off over my head. And I said, if she can do it, I can do it. If God will do it for her, he'll do it for me. So I decided for myself that I would recover. And I didn't know how long it was going to take. I didn't even know really where to begin, but I made the decision that I can and would recover. And so I began to study. I began to certainly lean into God's word and in prayer. I also began to learn about our minds and bodies and what happens to us in the midst of grief or trauma. And then lastly, I just started to pay really radical attention to everything in my surroundings, people and conversations, my physical environment, the food I was putting in my body, music, TV, just anything and everything. I started to pay attention to the things that were helpful to me and the things that were hurting me. And I began to remove the things that were hurting me and increase the things that were helpful to me. And I started to feel better. I started to get back to myself and live life again. It was around that time that I actually had an opportunity to move down to Florida. So my daughter and I moved down to Florida, and we were feeling good. It was a new chapter. And then we come to July 8th, 2018. On that day, we found out that my 20-year-old son died of an accidental drug overdose. And that is when my daughter Piper posed the question to me, "You aren't going anywhere, are you?" See, because of the circumstances in our family, because we had just lost my mom to suicide, her first thought was that I wouldn't be able to shoulder the weight of this grief, that this current tragedy and trauma would be the thing that would take me out of the game as well. I'm thankful that I was able to tell her confidently in that moment that I wasn't going anywhere, because I had learned the things that helped. When I was dealing with the loss of my mom, I had learned how to recover, how to deal with the overwhelming feelings of grief and sorrow, and how to move through them and get back to living life. So I was able to tell her confidently that I wasn't going anywhere. Now, as I began to go through the process of mourning my son, I couldn't help but notice that it was night and day different. It was literally so different from when I had lost my mom. It was radical. And so it was then that I realized, these are skills that can be taught. These are lessons. These are things that people can learn. This is a skill set that you can develop. And I knew that I had to share it with others. So it was then that I began to document and share the process that I had learned, which is now called the Grief Relief Program. So I wrote a book about this crazy story of mine, and also the 5-step framework, which is the Grief Relief Program. That book has been helping people all around the world. I also created a nonprofit in my son's honor called Q's Army. His name is Quentin, and so we called him Q for short. And I started a nonprofit to just raise awareness about the opioid epidemic, and also to give price-reduced resources to families who've lost loved ones to overdose and suicide, because I know firsthand how detrimental and how difficult that is. The other thing that happened is that just, days after my son passed, I asked the Lord for 300,000 lives to be impacted for good. I asked him for this one life that was taken, that 300,000 lives would be impacted positively, whether it's someone who's encouraged to find help in recovery, or find the strength to continue on in their recovery, or if it's a family member who's lost a loved one to addiction, to find the hope, courage, and strength to continue on and find healing for themselves. Whatever it looks like, I'm believing for a harvest of 300,000 lives that'll be benefited in his honor, basically. And that is what I've been doing ever since. So now I teach this framework in a variety of platforms and modalities. I do public speaking and help people learn the lessons that I learned in order to fully recover from grief and loss and learn to love their lives. So for today's sake, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our 5-step process, the Grief Relief Program, and I'm going to give you a little bit deeper teaching on 3 of the points. For the sake of time, we won't go in depth into each of the 5 points, but we will do an overview. So here they all are, the 5 steps listed out. Number 1 is map maker. It's the most important step. This is where we decide what we believe and what we want. Step 2 is our path protector. Once we've determined what we believe and what we want, step 2 is all about protecting our healing environment to make sure we can move forward. Step 3 is our mindful makeover, and that's where we really learn some basics about neurology, how our neurological systems work, and how to some exercises for dealing with overwhelming sorrow and grief and emotions, and how to take captive our thoughts, how to pay attention to what we're thinking about so that it doesn't become destructive in our lives. There's a whole lot of tools in there about how to control your thinking, distract your thinking, and redirect your thinking as needed so that it is not detrimental in your life. Step 4 is our community collaborator. We are really designed to do life in community. We are designed to be interdependent on one another. That's how God created us. And certainly healing from grief is exactly the same. So in community collaborator, we help teach people how to identify healthy community versus not healthy community and really find the community that's going to work best for them during this season of healing. And then once they do find healthy community, we help teach people how to really get the most out of community, how to be present and give and receive in the context of community. And then step 5 is our Trailblazer step, and that is where you take your pain and turn it into purpose. It is my favorite step because it is where the magic happens. It is where the thing that the enemy meant for harm gets turned into something that is not only for your good, but for the good of those around you. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of these steps. So step 1, map maker. What do you believe? Now, I mentioned that this is the most important step, and I can't say that enough. This is the most important foundational step. This is also the step that takes people the longest amount of time to move through because there's a lot in this step. So the first one is, what do you believe? I think that the enemy, one of his favorite tricks is at moments of disappointment or trauma, he wants to come in and sow a lie. He wants to get you to believe a lie about God, who God is, who you are to God, that God's not faithful or trustworthy. And so it's very common for people to unknowingly sometimes even come into agreement with a lie or begin to believe a lie in the midst of heartache. If you remember from my story, the lie that I started to believe is that I would never recover. I saw the people around me who weren't recovered, and I just began to believe the lie that recovery wasn't available for me. So that's one of the ones that we cover, and a lot of people are holding on to that belief without even realizing it. Another common lie that I find clients are stuck in is believing that moving forward means that they are forgetting or didn't love the person that they lost. Parents especially, I see, really struggle with this one. They feel like if they have any kind of joy or happiness in their life, it means that they didn't love their child or they weren't a good parent. We also unpack some other just examples. There's a lot of examples that we could use, but if you're believing that it was your fault, or if you believe, here's one, do you believe that God can use even this for your good? Those are some of the examples of things that we look at, but it really is personal to each and every person. We just ask probing questions and shine a light to give people the opportunity to discover if they have any lies. Another thing in this area is, family traditions and cultural beliefs. A lot of people, the way they handle grief and loss is just what they saw their family doing when they were younger, or what their culture did in their through their heritage. And just because it was handed down to you doesn't mean it's something that's good for you or that you should keep. The thing we try to work with folks to help them to realize is that it's 100% your choice to make what you choose to believe, and you alone will carry the consequences of that, good or bad. So if you have family traditions or cultural beliefs that aren't rooted in truth and love or aren't serving you, now is the time to expose those things and undo those things and decide for yourself what is the truth that you're going to meditate on. Certainly, taking a look at God's word and lining up our beliefs and our practices to his word to see if they're in alignment or not. That is really the foundational step of what do we believe in step 1. And then the second half of step 1 is determining what you want. There's a lot of things that we want when we lose a loved one. We want more time with them. We want it to not be true. Especially if it was sudden or tragic, we want answers. We want to know what happened. We want to know who's responsible. There's a lot of things that we can want. And wanting those things in and of itself isn't problematic. God designed our minds to be logical and want to make sense of things. And God, is a God of justice, and all those things he wired into us. The question that I ask folks and I help people work through is, are you wanting those things and pursuing those things at the cost of your own peace and joy? Is it tipped over to an unhealthy balance, or are you pursuing things in a healthy, balanced, biblical way? Answers, for example, when I lost my mom, and I still don't have all the answers to what happened exactly to her, but my pursuit of answers, it became all consuming for me, and it was robbing me of peace and joy, and it was keeping me stuck from being able to heal and move forward in my life because I was so consumed with answers. And again, this is incredibly individual and personal for each and every person. So we just want to open up the conversation and to have people decide for themselves, what is it that they're wanting? I do have to speak to the sympathy one that you see there on the screen. Sympathy and wanting and needing support from those around you is absolutely natural and healthy and good. The thing that I see all too often in our culture and society is that people will take something that was harmful to them or a hurtful situation and wear it like an identity. There is a place where sympathy can become hurtful or harmful. It can actually keep you stuck. A quick example for me is that, after I lost my son, so many people would come up to me and say, Kelli, I don't know how you get out of bed every day. And if I wasn't careful, if I would have come into agreement with their thinking of me in my life, I would stop getting out of bed every morning, So sympathy can be a dangerous slope. You can find yourself, it's like a good blanket that you just cuddle up with. And that's nice at times, but at some point you have to get out from under the blanket and re-engage with life. And so we ask some questions and make room for personal reflection to decide if that is something that you're doing or not. Now, hopefully at the end of step one, the last destination that we talk about is restoration of peace and joy. If you decide for yourself that that is what you want, we'll help you to create a plan and get you there. But you have to be clear that that is what you want. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and his word promises us the peace that surpasses all understanding. But the key is he promises those things in submission to his lordship over our life. And his lordship over our life would ask us to set down our need, or rather demands, for these other things. So if you're asking for vengeance or needing answers or needing all these other things, I would encourage you, and I encourage clients to work through and find a place and a way to be able to release those things to the Lord, trust him with those things so that he can give you the peace that surpasses all understanding. It is available to you, but it is in submission to him. So once we work through all of that with our clients, the finishing piece of step one is creating a statement, a framework, a mantra for yourself. So this becomes your rooted truth, your anchor. It could be a scripture that you meditate on, but I really like it to be a personalized statement specific to the loss. So this is the truth that you choose to meditate on. Even though the circumstances or your feelings might tell you one thing, you decide for yourself what the truth is and what you want, and that is the thing that you meditate on. And so my example, when I lost my son, my statement was, my son is not gone. He's just not here. I will see him again one day, and we'll have all of eternity to spend together. Now, that is a true statement. That is the truth I chose to meditate on. And that became one of my tools in comforting myself and dealing with overwhelming thoughts, emotions, and things like that. So we work with folks to come up with their own personalized statement at the end of step one. And with that, let's move on to step two. So as I mentioned, once you do the hard work of step one and sifting through to find out if there's lies or unforgiveness or any of those stumbling blocks holding you up, once you decide what you believe and what you want, now our job is to really protect the path so that you can accelerate through the healing process. And so this is really boundaries on steroids. This is taking a look at every single thing in your environment and deciding for yourself what you're going to reduce, remove, or increase during this healing season. It's another important thing to know that this is a season in your life. This will not last forever, although at times it feels like it may last forever. And certainly if you don't do anything to process through it, it will last a really long time. But just as if you had a major surgery or were in a car accident, there's a healing season. There's a season of recovery, and you treat yourself differently and you treat your environment differently when you are going through a recovery season, and grief is no different. So what we encourage people to do is look at everything in their life and take those three columns: reduce, remove, and increase, right? Because it's not just about removing the bad, it's about increasing the good as well. You need to pay attention to what is helpful and make sure that you have plenty of that going on in your day and in your environment. I encourage people to set an initial plan for 3 months and then revisit it about every 3 months or so, because you'll find that things that may have been problematic or hurtful in the beginning, after time, are not. So, an example from my own life: when my son first passed away, there's a handful of songs that just really remind me of him on my playlist, on my phone, my music app. And they were either tied to memories of him or some of his favorite songs. And at first, when I'd just have my playlist on shuffle and one of those songs would come on and it would hijack my day. I would get sick to my stomach. It would be really upsetting, and it'd take a lot of effort for me to get back on track and deal with those emotions. So right after he passed away, I removed all those songs from my playlist because I knew I was contending for my healing. I knew it was going to take effort, and I didn't want anything to come in and hijack my thoughts or my emotions without my consent, right? And so same thing for TV and social media and all these things that are coming at you every day. You really need to take control over your environment and make sure that nothing is going to come and hijack your day or hijack your emotions. Now, I will say it's quite a bit later now, and I'm doing much better now. So we actually even have a Quentin playlist, in my music list. And sometimes my daughter and I will on purpose, listen to the songs that he loved or songs that remind us of him so that we can think about him. So it will change over time, but it's important to at least be intentional about this in the beginning and create a plan for yourself. So that is our step 2, protecting the path or path protector. Then for the sake of time, we're going to skip over steps 3 and 4, and we're going to talk about step 5, Trailblazer. This is my favorite step because, again, this is where, in my opinion, where the magic happens. This is also the step that you'll be doing for the rest of your life. So it's all about finding a purpose for your pain. And there's 2 categories of purposes for your pain. The first is internal purposes. And then secondly, we want to talk about external purposes. But first, internal purposes, we want to look and realize all the ways that we have been changed for the good because of this awful thing that happened. Now, we didn't ask for it to happen. We wouldn't want it to happen. I still would choose any day to have my son here instead of the ways that I'm stronger because of it. But since I can't change that, I can acknowledge and appreciate and value the ways that it's made me better. And that's an important part of your healing and moving forward, is to be able to acknowledge the ways that you are better because of this loss or because of this hardship. So there's a lot of ways that you may notice internally that you're better or different. One of the biggest things that I personally experienced, and I've heard from so many people, is that losing someone you love radically changes your perspective on life. When you've had a massive loss like this, it kind of puts everything into perspective. We're so easy and quick to get consumed and worried about things that really don't matter at the end of the day. And there's nothing like losing someone you love to just bring everything into crystal clarity. And so that gift of perspective is a gift. And a lot of times people don't receive that gift without going through trauma or tragedy. And so we really should acknowledge it and appreciate it. Secondly, I think all of us tap into a strength that we didn't even know that we had. I know for so many people and parents, especially if someone were to say, what's your biggest fear in life? I think for pretty much every parent, losing a child is their biggest fear. So there's something about when your biggest fear happens to you and you're still standing, you're still going forward, you find the strength that you didn't even know that you had. And it's okay to acknowledge and celebrate that. That's what the strength piece is about. Certainly resilience, the fact that whatever it looks like for you, the fact that you continue moving forward, there is a resilience that comes from that. And also a confidence about what might come in the future. Once you've gone through something really heavy, really hard, really big in your life, it helps you to feel prepared for other future things, good or bad. You know that you can handle it. Another outcome or way you might be different is an increased intimacy with God. One of the benefits that I experienced is it was a testing of my faith. Before my mom passed away, I would have said that my faith was unshakable. I would have said that I had implicit trust, for God, for me and everyone in my life. I was living under the false concept that bad things don't happen to Christians, that when you're a Christian, you live under this little bubble and you're just always perfectly protected and nothing bad ever happens. And that's what I was believing. And so when my mom passed away, it shook me to my core. I questioned my faith. I really struggled. I first of all thought God was just a big joke. I thought I had been bamboozled. I thought, that he wasn't real. This was just an awful joke. And then as a little bit of time went by, I was incredibly angry at him and had to take that anger to him. And, he met me in that place, and he was good and he was gracious and he was kind and he was loving. He was the person that I had always known him to be. And because he was exactly the same, in that moment, I learned that I could trust him in a way I hadn't before. I discovered in that moment that no matter what's going on, no matter what the circumstances are in my life, whether I understand it or not, whether I'm happy about it or not, however I am towards him, that he will always be the same. And that became the bedrock for the faith that I stand on today, is this I truly do have an unshakable faith in the fact that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and nothing that happens to me will ever change that. I can always run and find him, and he will be the same. And so I know that's a common experience for a lot of people. That is one of the ways that you may benefit from your pain. But then this is even the most exciting for me, where when we start to look at the ways that we've been personally benefited by, or turning our pain into purpose, right? What are the purposes? Then we begin to look at how can we use this situation to help others. And I do believe that this is, again, the design for the way we're meant to live. I believe that all things that happen to you, good and bad, are not just for you. They're actually intended to be a lesson and a resource and sharing for others. And so in this second part of step 5, we take a look at how can we use this awful thing that's happened to help others. And I've seen so many examples of this. I mean, so many amazing inventions, companies, nonprofits, speakers, coaches, pastors, so many things were birthed out of tragedy and trauma. And so this is the opportunity for folks to take a look at their tragedy and trauma and to start to think and wonder and dream about how they might use it for the good of people around them. Now, on a small scale, it could just be if you've lost someone you love, you know what that feels like. And so you are now better equipped to be there for someone else when they lose somebody they love. And if that's all you ever do, if that's the only way that you ever, express it externally, then what a beautiful thing that is, right? To be able to be with someone in their darkest hour and coming from a knowing place, that is a treasure. That is a rare opportunity. And you have to earn that. You earn that because you went through it as well, right? So not anyone can speak into their pain, but you can speak into their pain because you have also gone through that. It's a very high price that each of us have paid to be able to speak into somebody's life that way. And I personally don't take that for granted. And I think it's such a beautiful gift whenever it can happen. But as I mentioned, there also may be incredibly larger movements that are born out of what you went through personally. Maybe you're meant to share your story. Maybe you're meant to write a book about it. Maybe you're meant to start a support group or something in your community. Maybe the cause, if you lost someone to overdose or suicide, or, maybe it fires you up to be a part of the solution. I just encourage every person to do that. And I'm so excited to see the things that are birthed out of those conversations with God and really thinking about what you might be able to do. So that, in a nutshell, that is the end of our 5-step process grief relief program that we take folks through all the time in our community. But I want to talk a bit about the state of the church and the fact that so many people are grieving kind of in epic proportions right now, right? It's not just addiction and suicide, which are both on the rise, but also certainly COVID and all the effects of COVID. So we have a world that is grieving. We have congregations and communities that are grieving. And if we don't help equip them to deal with their grief and move through their grief, these are some of the effects of unresolved grief. So irritability and anger, hyper alertness and anxiety, addiction, depression, suicide, overworking, and isolation. I know each and every one of these things are currently, problems that we're facing in our community, but I am greatly concerned that if we don't help people deal with their grief now, that 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, all of those things are going to be in even higher numbers because the world itself is dealing with a tremendous amount of grief like we haven't known in a long time, if ever. And I personally feel like we don't have enough tools and resources to equip people to deal with grief adequately and help them process through. So what is the solution? The solution is our practical hands-on program that equips people with tools for dealing with grief. It also is a system for training trainers to be able to offer these tools and create a safe place for practicing the skills people need to recover from grief and loss. So this is our grief relief programs and Grief Guru coaching. So we have 2 main flagship programs that we offer folks that we work with. The first is Grief Relief Nation, which is a year-long course and community. So students get access to lessons from each of these fabulous content contributors over on the right-hand side of the screen. And what I love about it, what I'm most proud about it, is that it's incredibly holistic. Grief affects the entire person, and there's a lot of different ways that it affects you. And so our Grief Relief Nation addresses each of those areas. We have Monique, who is an artist and helps teach folks how to use art to process deep sorrow and get in touch with the emotions related to grief. We have Dr. Darlene Mayo, who's a neuroscientist and teaches us fabulous amounts of information about what happens to our minds when we're grieving, and a lot of those tips and tools and tricks on how to reestablish order in our mind and deal with those overwhelming emotions. And then we have Dr. Melody Stevens, who helps to talk about what our bodies need, right? What food to eat and how to move our bodies so that we're, again, doing everything we can to facilitate healing. And then Sean Hancock, who is amazing, and he's a comedian and owns an improv studio. He teaches about intentional laughter and play. That actually is another big myth that's out there, that you can't have joy in the midst of grief. I'm here to say that you can, not only can you have joy in the midst of grief, but you can actually intentionally partner with joy and schedule joy into your day, and that is going to accelerate your healing. And so powerful, powerful stuff that he shares. Then we also have Michelle Bagnot, who talks about parenting, if you have children that are also dealing with grief, some tools for that. And then lastly, we have Kristen Freely, who does some work around forgiveness and also introduction into inner healing, because for some people, they want or need some kind of deeper sessions with folks to chat with Holy Spirit and do some inner healing work. And so she gives introductions to that. So just a wealth of knowledge that is shared from these coaches. And in the Grief Relief Nation, it's a 1-year program. They have access to all the lessons, and then we also have a private Facebook community for folks to get to participate in community, get encouragement and support, and then we have a once-a-month meeting for all of our Grief Relief Nation members. The next one is our Grief Relief Accelerator program, and this is a 10-week, it's a more intense and intentional program where someone really says, I'm going to set aside 10 weeks to really tackle this. And in the 10 weeks, our grief guru coaches take them through the 5-step framework that I just explained to you in much deeper detail and instruction, and really help people to create for themselves their own recovery plan, because it's personal for each person, and they have to decide for themselves what tools they're going to use, what commitments they're going to make. And we really help walk them through that and hold them accountable to make decisions and create a plan that is going to serve them well and help them to completely recover from grief. So those are our 2 main programs that we offer over at Grief Guru. We also do one-on-one coaching for folks as well. I want to mention we have certified coaches that can work with people one-on-one. But what I'm so excited about, and the thing that just really was laid on my heart to offer for churches and recovery communities, homeless shelters, battered women shelters, like really any community organization that is working with people that are in their community or living with them and may have some unresolved grief going on. We have a certification program for the organization where, whether it's a staff member or a lay leader who is just passionate about this, they can actually go through training and certification with us to become a certified grief guru coach. And there's an initial training to get them certified, but then we provide monthly support as well. So again, my heart is to really equip and train and encourage the people who are leading these classes to make sure that their cup stays full and that they are leading from a place of knowledge and wisdom, and that they have adequate support to be able to lead these groups. And then what they can do is teach our Grief Relief Accelerator program, that 10-week intense. We train them how to lead the 10-week process, and then they can lead that program as often or as many times as they like throughout the year. So you can have multiple groups going on, as many as your leader can handle or that your community would need, but that having someone certified on your staff gives them access to be able to use and facilitate the Grief Relief Accelerator program. Again, my heart is to just make this as accessible as possible to get help into the hands as many people that need it, that want to get the help as possible. So that is the offer that we have for our community partnership program. And then lastly, I do just want to circle back to the amazing story of Immaculate. When I began to work on writing the book and stepping out into this work of sharing my story with others, the Lord just really laid it on my heart to reach out to Immaculate and let her know the impact that she had made in my life. And I'm not kidding. The day he put that on my heart, I went to her website and looked up, I was just going to send her a message through her website, but I found that she was speaking the very next day, just 2 hours away from where I live in Florida. It was a God thing completely. So I got a ticket to where she was speaking, went and saw her speak, and that on the screen is a picture of the two of us. I was able to meet her and share my story with her and let her know that, the impact that she made on my life was so profound and meaningful, and that I was going to do the best I could to go out and do the same for other people, that I would share my story And that for, any kind of impact that my story makes, part of it is credited to her because, she could have just lived her comfortable, healed, happy life and not shared her story. And I don't know where I would be if she hadn't have done that. So I'm forever indebted and grateful to her. And I am, passionate about doing the same thing as well. And I also believe that there are people right now, there are people who need to hear my story. There are also people who need to hear your story. Anybody who's gone through something hard, you have no idea the power of sharing your story and letting other people, see your example and glean from you and see healing. Like, that's so powerful. And so I'm just out to find as many more Immaculates as possible to duplicate and replicate ourselves so that there can be so many examples of people walking and healing, so that others might see it and find healing for themselves. So that is my presentation. I am always motivated by teaching people how to learn to move forward on purpose, in purpose, right? That we're going to move forward with our lives with intentionality and that it's rooted in purpose, that there is a meaning for our lives here. There's a meaning for the rest of the days that we have left, and we're going to make the most of it in honor of those that we lost, especially. So I do have a QR code on here. You know what? If you're watching this on the replay, hopefully you can scan that QR code. It's a follow-up form to request information of me. But if you would, there's kind of 3 categories, and I'll just encourage and invite you to just email me directly as well if you'd like any of these. If you would like some free resources for grief and loss and how to recover, just for members of your congregation, I'd be happy to send those to you. If you would like to learn about how to become a community partner and have someone get certified, whether you're at a church, recovery facility, I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. And then lastly, I do public speaking and go and share my story and share this 5-step framework all over the country. So if you have interest in having me come to your community as a speaker, I would love to chat with you about that as well. You can email any of those requests or any additional questions at Kelli, Kelli, @thegriefguru.com, and I would be glad to speak with you. So thank you so much for taking this time to participate in our delayed virtual recording. I hope it was a blessing to you.